Flames danced against the night sky as 19-year-old Penelope Lawson watched in horror from the second-story window of her father's general store, her younger sister Pearl's fingers digging painfully into her arm. It was 1885 in Holbrook, Arizona Territory, and what had begun as a quiet evening inventory had transformed into a nightmare when a lamp toppled in the storeroom below, igniting the dry goods and trapping the sisters upstairs behind a wall of fire. "We're going to die here, aren't we?" Pearl whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames consuming the wooden structure beneath them. At 18, Pearl had always been the practical one, the one who saw things as they were rather than as she wished them to be. "No," Penelope replied firmly, though the smoke already stung her eyes and throat, making it difficult to breathe. "Someone will come. Father will be back from Winslow soon. He'll know what to do." But their father had left that morning to pick up supplies, and he wasn't due back until tomorrow. The sisters had been left to mind the store as they often were, with instructions to lock up at sundown. Now, as midnight approached, the town was quiet save for the crackle and pop of burning timber. "Look." Pearl suddenly cried, pointing to the street below where a lone figure had appeared, riding hard toward the blaze. The rider pulled his horse to a stop, the animal rearing and whinnying at the sight and smell of the fire. Even from her position at the window, Penelope could see the man's face illuminated by the glow of the flames, square-jawed, with intense eyes beneath the brim of a dusty hat. He wore the practical clothing of a cattleman-worn denim, leather vest, and boots that had seen many miles. "Help us." Penelope screamed, waving frantically. "We're trapped." The man's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto hers. Without hesitation, he leapt from his horse and rushed toward the burning building. "Stand back from the door," his deep voice called up to them. "I'm coming in." "He's mad," Pearl muttered, but Penelope could see the hope flickering in her sister's eyes. The stranger disappeared from view, and for several agonizing moments, the sisters heard nothing but the destructive symphony of the fire. Then came the sound of splintering wood and a crash from below, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs. "The stairs won't hold much longer," Pearl cried, moving toward the door of their father's office where they had taken refuge. Just as she reached for the handle, the door burst inward with such force that Pearl stumbled backward into Penelope's arms. There in the doorway, silhouetted against the orange glow of the flames, stood the stranger, his bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth. "Owen Norwood," he said simply, his voice muffled by the cloth. "And we need to leave now." Penelope had never been carried by a man before, aside from her father when she was a child. But as the cowboy named Owen swept her into his arms and instructed Pearl to follow close behind, she found herself clinging to his neck, feeling the solid strength of him as he navigated the treacherous stairway that was now more fire than wood. "The back door," she shouted over the roar. "It's the only way out now," Owen nodded, adjusting his course. The heat was unbearable, the smoke so thick that Penelope could barely make out Pearl's form following just steps behind. Then she heard her sister scream as a burning beam crashed down, missing them by inches but blocking the path between them. "My sister," Penelope cried, struggling in Owen's arms. "You have to get Pearl." Owen set Penelope down near the back entrance. "Stay here," he commanded, then turned and plunged back into the inferno toward Pearl's terrified voice. Penelope watched, heart pounding, as the silhouette of the cowboy disappeared into the smoke and flames. Seconds stretched like hours until finally, two figures emerged, Owen with Pearl in his arms, both of them coughing and covered in soot. They barely made it through the back door when a deafening crack announced the collapse of the store's second floor. The three of them stumbled into the alleyway, gasping for fresh air as they watched the building that had been the Lawsons' livelihood and home crumble into a pyre of broken dreams. Owen guided the sisters away from the heat, his strong hands steady on their shoulders. In the distance, shouts could be heard as townspeople finally noticed the blaze and began to gather. But for a moment, it was just the three of them, two sisters saved from certain death by a stranger who had appeared like a ghost in the night. "Thank you," Penelope managed between coughs, looking up into the face of their rescuer as he pulled down his bandana. revealing a strong, clean-shaven jaw and lips pressed into a grim line. His eyes, she now saw, were the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue, and they regarded her with a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite name. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now that the immediate danger had passed. "No, thanks to you," Pearl answered, still trembling, "but everything we had was in there." Owen's gaze moved from the burning building to the sisters, lingering for a moment on Penelope's face. "Things can be rebuilt," he said simply. "Lives can't be replaced." As the townspeople arrived with buckets of water in a futile attempt to save what remained of the store, Penelope realized that the cowboy was right. They had lost much this night, but they were alive. And as she watched Owen Norwood organizing the bucket brigade with natural authority, she felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the smoke she'd inhaled. Little did she know that the fire that had nearly claimed their lives would be the spark that ignited something far more enduring. The town doctor, a kindly older man named Dr. Fredericks, insisted on examining the sisters despite their protests that they were fine. They sat side by side on a bench outside the barber shop, which had been hastily converted into a medical office for the emergency. Pearl went first, allowing the doctor to listen to her breathing and check for burns. "You're lucky," he pronounced, patting Pearl's hand. "Some minor smoke inhalation, but nothing serious. A day or two of rest and you'll be good as new." As the doctor turned his attention to Penelope, she found her gaze drawn to Owen Norwood, who stood a short distance away in conversation with Sheriff Thomas. The cowboy's broad shoulders were tense, his stance alert even in the aftermath of his heroism. He glanced her way, catching her staring, and Penelope quickly looked down, feeling heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with her proximity to the now dwindling fire. "You'll need to take it easy as well, Miss Lawson," Dr. Fredericks was saying, drawing her attention back to him. "Where will you and your sister be staying tonight?" The question hit Penelope like a physical blow. She hadn't thought that far ahead yet. The upstairs of the general store had been their home since their mother died 3 years ago. Now, with their father away and everything they owned reduced to ashes, they had nowhere to go. "They can stay with us," said Mrs. Holloway, the mayor's wife, who had been hovering nearby with blankets and offers of tea. "We have a spare room." "That's very kind of you," Penelope began, but she was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Thomas and Owen. "Ladies," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "I've been talking with Mr. Norwood here. He says the fire appeared to have started in the storeroom. Any idea what might have caused it?" Penelope exchanged a glance with Pearl. "We were doing inventory," she explained. "I had a lamp in the storeroom, but I'm certain I placed it safely on the high shelf, away from any goods." "Could someone have entered the store after you went upstairs?" Owen asked, his deep voice resonating in the quiet night. Pearl shook her head. "We locked the front door when we finished for the day. No one could have come in without our knowing." The sheriff scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, accidents happen, especially with oil lamps. The important thing is you two are safe. Your father should be back tomorrow, and we'll get this all sorted out. In the meantime," Owen said, "I'd like to offer my assistance. My ranch is just outside of town and I have plenty of room. You'd be welcome to stay until your father returns and other arrangements can be made." Penelope was startled by the offer. "That's very generous, Mr. Norwood, but we couldn't impose. It's no imposition," he interrupted gently. "My sister Caroline lives with me. She'd be glad of the female company. And it would give you both a chance to rest without the whole town dropping by to offer condolences and ask questions." Mrs. Holloway looked slightly put out, but Sheriff Thomas nodded in approval. "Norwood's place is one of the finest spreads in the county. You'd be comfortable there, and it's only a short ride from town. Your father could find you easily enough when he returns." Penelope looked at Pearl, who seemed too exhausted to care where they went as long as there was a bed waiting. "If you're certain it wouldn't be an imposition," Penelope said to Owen, "we would be grateful for your hospitality." Owen's stern expression softened slightly. "It's settled then. I'll have my foreman bring the wagon around to take you out to the ranch." "Is there anything you need from town before we go?" Penelope glanced down at their soot-stained dresses and realized they had nothing, no clothes, no personal items, not even a hairbrush. "We've lost everything," she said quietly. "Don't you worry about that, Mrs. Holloway interjected, seemingly recovered from her momentary disappointment. "The ladies' auxiliary will put together some necessities for you. We'll have them sent out to the Norwood place first thing in the morning." Within the hour, Penelope and Pearl found themselves seated in a well-sprung wagon driven by a weathered man who introduced himself as Hank, the Norwood Ranch foreman. Owen rode alongside on his chestnut gelding, occasionally glancing over as if to assure himself that the sisters were still there. The night air was cool after the intense heat of the fire, and Penelope drew the borrowed blanket tighter around her shoulders. Pearl had already fallen asleep, her head resting against Penelope's shoulder, exhausted by the night's events. "It's not much further," Owen said, guiding his horse closer to the wagon. In the moonlight, his profile was strong and distinctly masculine, the kind of face that spoke of determination and resilience. "You'll be able to see the ranch house once we crest this hill." As they topped the rise, Penelope gasped softly. Below them, nestled in a small valley with a creek running through it, stood a large, handsome ranch house with a wide veranda wrapping around three sides. Even in the darkness, she could see it was well maintained, with warm light spilling from several windows. "You live here?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. The Norwood Ranch was clearly prosperous, far more so than she had imagined. Owen nodded. "Built it myself with help from my men. Started with just a one-room cabin when I came out here 10 years ago." "It's beautiful," Penelope murmured, wondering at the story behind the man who had saved them. He couldn't be much older than 28 or 29, yet he had established what appeared to be a substantial ranch in a relatively short time. As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and a slender woman with the same storm-gray eyes as Owen stepped out onto the porch. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and she wore a practical cotton dress, but there was an elegance to her bearing that spoke of good breeding. "Owen, we were getting worried. Hank rode ahead and told us what happened in town." Her gaze fell on the sisters in the wagon, and her expression immediately softened. "You poor dears. Come inside where it's warm. I've had rooms prepared and hot water sent up for baths." Pearl stirred as the wagon came to a stop. "Where are we?" she murmured sleepily. "This is my sister Caroline," Owen said, helping first Pearl and then Penelope down from the wagon. His hands were strong and calloused, but his touch was gentle as he steadied Penelope, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Caroline bustled forward to greet them, her manner warm and welcoming. "I'm so sorry about your home and store," she said, guiding them toward the house. "But you're safe now, and that's what matters most." Owen has always had a knack for being in the right place at the right time. Inside, the ranch house was as impressive as its exterior had promised: spacious rooms with solid, well-crafted furniture, colorful rugs on polished wooden floors, and oil paintings in gilt frames adorning the walls. It spoke of success and good taste, a far cry from the modest rooms above the general store that the Lawson sisters had called home. "The bathwater should still be hot," Caroline said, leading them up a broad staircase. "I've laid out nightgowns and robes for you both. They might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can sort out proper clothing tomorrow." Penelope glanced back to see Owen standing in the entrance hall, watching them ascend. When their eyes met, he gave a slight nod, as if assuring her once more that they were welcome in his home. Later, scrubbed clean and dressed in a borrowed nightgown that was indeed several sizes too large, Penelope stood at the window of her assigned bedroom, gazing out at the moonlit landscape of the Norwood Ranch. The room was comfortable, with a four-poster bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small writing desk near the window. It was far grander than anything she had ever slept in before. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Caroline or perhaps Pearl. Instead, Owen Norwood entered, carrying a tray with a steaming cup. He had changed from his smoke-infused clothes into clean trousers and a fresh shirt, his damp hair suggesting he too had bathed. Caroline thought you might like some tea with honey, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. It's good for the throat after smoke inhalation. Thank you, Penelope said, suddenly conscious of her state of undress, despite being fully covered by the voluminous nightgown and robe. And thank you again for what you did tonight. Pearl and I would have died if not for you. Owen's expression remained serious, but his eyes softened. I'm just glad I was passing by when I was. I'd been in Winslow on business and was riding back late, figuring I'd stop in town for a meal before heading home. Penelope moved away from the window, perching on the edge of the bed. It seems fate had other plans for your evening, so it would appear. He remained standing, his tall frame imposing even in the spacious bedroom. Your sister is already asleep. Caroline checked on her a few minutes ago. Pearl always could sleep through anything, Penelope said with a fond smile. Even as children, she'd be the first to sleep and the last to wake. A moment of awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Owen cleared his throat. I sent a rider to intercept your father on the road from Winslow. He should be here by midday tomorrow. Relief washed over Penelope. That was thoughtful of you. He'll be beside himself with worry when he hears what happened, but relieved to find you both safe and well. Owen moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. Try to get some rest, Miss Lawson. You've had quite an ordeal. Please, she said impulsively, call me Penelope. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Penelope, he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. Good night, then, Penelope. Good night, Owen, she replied, the familiarity of using his given name sending an unexpected thrill through her. After he left, Penelope sat for a long time on the edge of the bed, sipping the honeyed tea and replaying the events of the evening in her mind. The terror of being trapped in the burning building, the relief of Owen's arrival, the devastating loss of their home and business, it all swirled together in a maelstrom of emotion. Yet amidst the chaos of her thoughts, one image remained clear, Owen Norwood's face, illuminated by firelight as he carried her to safety. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an understated nobility that called to something deep within her. Setting aside the empty teacup, Penelope finally climbed into the luxurious bed, sinking into its softness with a sigh. Despite the tumult of the day, she found herself looking forward to the morning and the chance to learn more about the man who had saved her life. As dawn broke over the Norwood ranch, Penelope woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a working cattle operation, distant lowing of cows, the neighing of horses, men's voices calling to one another as they began their day's work. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back: the fire, the rescue, the loss of everything they owned. A soft knock at the door preceded Caroline's entry, her arms laden with folded clothing. Good morning, she said cheerfully. I hope you slept well despite everything. Better than I would have expected, Penelope admitted, sitting up in bed. I've brought some things that might fit you, Caroline said, laying the clothes on the foot of the bed. We're of a similar height, though you're more slender than I am. There are undergarments, stockings, and 2 dresses to choose from. Penelope was touched by the thoughtfulness. You're very kind. I don't know how we'll ever repay you and your brother for all you've done. Caroline waved away her thanks. Owen wouldn't hear of anything of the sort. Besides, it's nice having other women in the house. It can get lonely out here sometimes, with just my brother and the ranch hands for company. As Penelope began to dress in the borrowed clothes, selecting a simple blue cotton dress that was indeed a bit loose around the waist but otherwise fit well enough, she asked, Have you and Owen lived here long? Caroline sat in a chair by the window, apparently in no hurry to leave. Owen established the ranch 10 years ago, as he probably told you. I joined him 5 years later after our parents died. Back east, there wasn't much opportunity for a spinster like me, but here I can be useful. I keep the house and the books for the ranch. It's a beautiful home, Penelope said, pinning up her hair as best she could without a proper brush. Your brother must be very successful. A proud smile lit Caroline's face. He is. Owen has a way with cattle that borders on uncanny. He can look at a herd and know exactly which animals will produce the best offspring. Started with just 50 head, and now we run over 2,000. Penelope was impressed despite herself. Most ranchers in the area operated on a much smaller scale. And it's just the two of you. No wives or husbands or children, just us, Caroline confirmed. Owen came close to marrying once, about 3 years ago, a banker's daughter from Prescott, but she couldn't abide ranch life and returned to her father's house after just 2 weeks of engagement. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Between us, I wasn't sorry to see her go. Minnie Blackburn was beautiful enough, but she had a mean streak a mile wide. Penelope found herself oddly relieved at this information, though she immediately chided herself for the reaction. What did it matter to her if Owen Norwood had been engaged before? She had only known the man for less than a day. And you, Caroline asked. No beau waiting in the wings. A pretty girl like you must have admirers. Penelope laughed softly. Hardly. Between helping father with the store and looking after Pearl, I've had little time for courting. Besides, most of the eligible men in Holbrook are either too old, too young, or too wild for my taste. Well, perhaps that will change now, Caroline said with a cryptic smile, rising from her chair. Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Your sister is already downstairs, eating like she hasn't seen food in a week. Penelope followed Caroline down to a large, sunny dining room where Pearl was indeed making short work of a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Her sister looked up with a guilty smile as they entered. I couldn't help myself, Pearl said. Mrs. Norwood's cook makes the best biscuits I've ever tasted. Call me Caroline, please, Owen's sister insisted, motioning for Penelope to take a seat. And eat as much as you like. Sophia always cooks enough to feed an army. Penelope had just filled her plate when Owen entered the room, dressed for a day's work in denims, boots, and a faded blue shirt that somehow intensified the color of his eyes. He stopped short when he saw her, his gaze lingering for a moment on her face before he nodded a greeting. Miss Lawson, he said, then corrected himself. Penelope, I trust you slept well. Very well, thank you, she replied, strangely flustered under his direct gaze. And please call my sister Pearl. We're not much for formality. Pearl then, Owen acknowledged with a nod to the younger Lawson. He took his seat at the head of the table and began filling his own plate. I've sent men to town to check on the state of your father's store. They should report back by noon. Penelope felt a pang of guilt. In the comfort and safety of the Norwood Ranch, she had momentarily forgotten the devastation that awaited them in Holbrook. I fear there won't be much left to salvage, she said quietly. Perhaps not, Owen agreed. But it's best to know for certain. Your father will want a full accounting when he arrives. Have you heard from the messenger you sent? Pearl asked, helping herself to another biscuit. Owen nodded. He intercepted your father about 10 miles outside of Winslow. They should be here by midday, barring any delays. The meal continued with polite conversation, Caroline doing most of the talking as she told stories about the ranch's early days and asked the sisters about their life in Holbrook. Penelope found herself watching Owen when she thought he wouldn't notice the economical way he moved, the careful attention he paid to everyone's words, the rare smile that transformed his serious face when Caroline related a particularly amusing anecdote. After breakfast, Owen excused himself to attend to ranch business, and Caroline suggested a tour of the property. It's a beautiful morning, and the fresh air will do you both good after last night's smoke. The tour revealed the Norwood Ranch to be even more impressive in daylight than it had seemed upon their arrival. Besides the main house, there was a large barn, bunkhouses for the ranch hands, a blacksmith's forge, and various other outbuildings necessary for a successful cattle operation. Beyond these, lush pastureland stretched to the horizon, dotted with grazing cattle. Owen's pride and joy, Caroline said, gesturing toward a fenced paddock where several magnificent horses grazed. He breeds quarter horses as a sideline to the cattle business. That chestnut stallion there Ajax has sired some of the finest cutting horses in the territory. As if summoned by his name, Owen appeared from the direction of the barn, leading a sleek black mare. He nodded to the women as he approached. I thought you might like to see some of the ranch beyond the buildings, he said, addressing Penelope directly. This is Midnight. She's gentle as a lamb but has plenty of spirit when needed. Would you care to ride? Penelope hesitated, glancing down at her borrowed dress, which was hardly suitable for horseback riding. Caroline, sensing her dilemma, quickly offered a solution. "I have riding skirts in the house," she said. "They might be a bit large, but with a belt, they'd serve the purpose. Pearl and I can continue our tour on foot while you change." Before Penelope could form an objection, she found herself being ushered back to the house by Caroline, who seemed determined to see her brother and their guest spend time together. Within 20 minutes, Penelope was back outside, dressed in a divided riding skirt and blouse that had been hastily altered with a few strategic pins. Owen was waiting by the paddock, now holding two saddled horses, the black mare and his own chestnut gelding. His eyes widened slightly as she approached, taking in her transformed appearance. "You look like you were born to ride," he said, offering his hand to help her mount. Penelope felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "My mother taught me when I was young," she explained, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. "We had a pony for deliveries from the store, but I haven't ridden regularly since she passed." "I'm sorry for your loss," Owen said, swinging up onto his own mount. "It's never easy losing a parent." "It was 3 years ago," Penelope replied, adjusting her reins. "Influenza took her in the winter of '82. Father was devastated. They'd been sweethearts since childhood." Owen nodded in understanding, then nudged his horse forward. "Come. There's a view from the North Ridge that's worth seeing." They rode in companionable silence for a time, Penelope marveling at how quickly her body remembered the rhythm of horseback riding. The mare beneath her was responsive and smooth-gaited, clearly well-trained and cared for. "Your sister says you have a gift with animals," she ventured as they climbed a gentle slope toward what she assumed was the North Ridge. Owen glanced at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Caroline exaggerates. I've just spent a lot of time around cattle and horses." "You learn to read them after a while. Still, to build all this in just 10 years, Penelope gestured to the vast ranch spread out below them. "It's remarkable." "I was fortunate," he said modestly. "Came west with a small inheritance from my grandfather and a lot of ideas about cattle breeding that the old-timers thought were foolish. Turned out some of those ideas worked. And the others," a genuine smile crossed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Those taught me valuable lessons about humility." They reached the top of the ridge, and Owen drew his horse to a halt, waiting for Penelope to do the same. Before them stretched a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside, the ranch buildings nestled in their small valley, pastureland extending in all directions, and in the far distance, the blue-purple shapes of mountains rising against the sky. "It's breathtaking," Penelope said softly, understanding now why he had wanted to show her this place. "I come up here sometimes when decisions need to be made," Owen said, his voice taking on a reflective quality she hadn't heard before. "Helps to see the bigger picture." Penelope studied his profile against the vast landscape, struck by how naturally he seemed to belong in this wild, beautiful country. In town, he had appeared almost out of place with his quiet intensity. Here, against the backdrop of the land he had tamed, he made perfect sense. "What brought you west?" she asked, curious about the path that had led him to this life. Owen was silent for so long that Penelope thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing each word. "I was engaged to be married back in Missouri," he said. "Catherine was the daughter of my father's business partner. It was all arranged, very proper. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found her in the arms of my best friend." "Oh," Penelope said softly, not expecting such a personal revelation. "I'm sorry." Owen shrugged, his eyes still on the distant mountains. "I could have forgiven her, I think. But when confronted, she admitted she had never loved me, that she was only marrying me for my family's position. It made me question everything, not just about her, but about the life that had been planned out for me since birth." "So you came west to start fresh, to find something real," he corrected, turning to look at her directly. "Something that couldn't be faked or arranged or bought." "I wanted to build something with my own hands, succeed or fail on my own merits." The intensity in his gaze made Penelope's heart quicken. There was something compelling about a man who had walked away from a life of privilege to forge his own path, who valued authenticity above comfort or convenience. And have you, she asked, found something real? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. The ranch is real enough. The work is honest, the rewards earned. As for the rest, he trailed off, his eyes still locked with hers. Penelope became acutely aware of how alone they were on the ridge, how intimate this conversation had become. She broke eye contact first, looking back toward the ranch buildings. "Is that dust on the road?" she asked, pointing to a faint cloud in the distance. Owen followed her gaze, shading his eyes against the sun. "Riders coming in. Might be your father." Relief and apprehension mingled in Penelope's chest. She was eager to see her father, to assure him that she and Pearl were safe, but she also dreaded having to tell him about the destruction of the store that had been their livelihood. "We should head back," Owen said, turning his horse. "Your father will want to see you as soon as he arrives." As they rode back toward the ranch house, Penelope found herself wishing the ride could have lasted longer, that she could have learned more about this complex man who had saved her life and then opened his home to her. There was a depth to Owen Norwood that intrigued her, layers beneath his quiet exterior that she had only begun to glimpse. By the time they reached the paddock, the riders were approaching the main house, two men on horseback, one of whom Penelope immediately recognized as her father despite the distance. Without waiting for Owen to help her dismount, she slid from the saddle and hurried toward the house, her heart pounding with the mixed emotions of seeing her father after the traumatic events of the previous night. Frederick Lawson was a tall, lean man in his early 50s, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent years working outdoors before settling into the life of a storekeeper. As he dismounted in front of the Norwood house, Penelope could see the worry etched into every line of his face. "Papa," she called, rushing forward. His expression transformed instantly from anxiety to relief. "Penelope." He opened his arms and she ran into his embrace, suddenly feeling like a child again, safe in her father's protection. "Pearl," he asked urgently, holding Penelope at arm's length to look into her face. "She's fine," Penelope assured him quickly. "She's with Miss Norwood touring the ranch." "We're both fine, thanks to Mr. Norwood." Frederick Lawson looked past his daughter to where Owen was approaching, leading both horses. "Mr. Norwood," he said, extending his hand, "I understand I owe you my daughter's lives." Owen clasped the offered hand firmly. "Anyone would have done the same, Mr. Lawson. I'm just glad I was passing by when I was." "Not anyone," Frederick disagreed. "My rider told me you went into a burning building not once but twice. That takes a special kind of courage." A faint flush colored Owen's cheekbones at the praise. "Your daughters showed plenty of courage themselves. They kept their heads in a dangerous situation." Just then, Pearl came running from around the side of the house, Caroline following at a more sedate pace. "Father." Pearl cried, throwing herself into Frederick's arms with the same abandon Penelope had shown. As father and daughters reunited, Owen stepped back, exchanging a glance with his sister that Penelope couldn't interpret. There seemed to be an entire conversation happening silently between the siblings, ending with Caroline giving a small nod. "Mr. Lawson," Owen said, drawing the older man's attention. "I'm sure you're anxious for news of your store. My men returned from town an hour ago with their report." Frederick's expression sobered. "Tell me straight, Mr. Norwood, how bad is it?" "I'm afraid the building is a complete loss," Owen said gently. "The fire burned hot and fast. By the time the townspeople organized a bucket brigade, there wasn't much left to save." Penelope watched her father's shoulders slump slightly before he straightened them again with deliberate effort. "Well," he said after a moment, "buildings can be rebuilt. The important thing is that my girls are safe." He looked at Owen with genuine gratitude. "Thanks to you, sir." "You're all welcome to stay here as long as necessary," Caroline interjected, stepping forward. "We have plenty of room and it's no trouble at all." Frederick shook his head. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't dream of imposing further. The hotel in town will suffice until we can make other arrangements." "Nonsense," Owen said firmly. "The Hallbrook Hotel is barely fit for traveling salesmen, let alone ladies. And with the fall roundup approaching, I could use an experienced hand like yourself, Mr. Lawson." "Your rider mentioned you ran cattle before opening the store." Penelope looked at Owen in surprise. It was true that her father had been a rancher in his younger days, but how had Owen known to ask about it? Frederick hesitated, clearly torn between pride and practicality. "It's been years since I worked a roundup," he admitted. "Like riding a horse," Owen said easily. "Some things you don't forget. I'm offering fair wages for honest work, Mr. Lawson, not charity. And your daughters would be company for my sister, who complains regularly about being surrounded by men with no conversation beyond cattle and weather." Caroline playfully swatted her brother's arm. "I do not complain, I merely observe." A reluctant smile cracked Frederick's serious expression. "Well, when you put it that way, Mr. Norwood, it would be ungentlemanly to deprive your sister of feminine companionship." Penelope felt a rush of relief. The prospect of staying at the Norwood Ranch was far more appealing than the cramped, shabby rooms of the Holbrook Hotel. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud, the opportunity to spend more time in Owen Norwood's company was not unwelcome. "Then it's settled," Owen said with a nod. "You'll stay until you've decided what to do about rebuilding. In the meantime, you can earn your keep helping with the roundup, and your daughters can assist Caroline however they see fit." As the group moved toward the house, Caroline linking arms with Pearl and chatting animatedly about plans for the coming days, Penelope found herself walking alongside Owen, a few paces behind the others. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this, not just the rescue, but everything." Owen glanced down at her, his expression softening in a way she was beginning to recognize as being reserved for moments when they were relatively alone. "Sometimes," he said, his voice equally low, "fate gives us opportunities we didn't know to ask for. I think perhaps the fire, as terrible as it was, might prove to be such an opportunity." Before Penelope could ask what he meant by that cryptic statement, they had reached the house, and the moment for private conversation was lost amidst the bustle of showing Frederick to his room and arranging for his belongings to be brought from his horse. Later that afternoon, Penelope stood on the veranda, watching as Owen showed her father around the ranch operations. From a distance, she could see them deep in conversation, Frederick gesturing as he spoke, Owen nodding thoughtfully. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, her father seemed more animated than she had seen him in years, back in an element that had once been his passion before her mother's preference for town life had led him to open the store. "They seem to be getting along well," Caroline observed, joining Penelope at the railing. "Your father knows his cattle, I'd wager." "He was a rancher until I was 12, Penelope confirmed. "Mother hated the isolation, so when the opportunity came to buy the store in Holbrook, he sold the herd and became a shopkeeper for her sake." Caroline nodded in understanding. "Love makes us do such things. Change our lives, our dreams, our very selves sometimes." "Yes," Penelope agreed softly, her eyes still following Owen's tall figure as he led her father toward the horse paddocks. "I suppose it does." Caroline studied her with shrewd eyes. "My brother is not always easy to know," she said after a moment. "He keeps much of himself hidden, even from me at times, but he is a good man, Penelope, the best I've ever known." Penelope felt her cheeks grow warm under Caroline's knowing gaze. "I've no doubt of that," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "He risked his life to save us after all." "Yes," Caroline said with a small smile. "He did. And Owen has never been one to take risks without good reason." Before Penelope could formulate a response to this puzzling statement, Pearl came bounding onto the veranda, her eyes bright with excitement. "Penelope, Caroline is going to teach me to make apple preserves tomorrow. Her orchard has the most beautiful fruit, and she says I have a natural talent for cooking." The moment for confidence is broken. Caroline turned her attention to the younger Lawson sister, and the conversation shifted to domestic matters. But as Penelope half listened to their discussion of recipes and techniques, she found her thoughts returning to Caroline's words about her brother, and to the man himself, now leading her father into the barn and out of her sight. The next few days fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Frederick spent his time with Owen and the ranch hands, preparing for the upcoming roundup and offering his expertise on cattle matters. Pearl became Caroline's shadow, eagerly learning household management skills, that she had previously shown little interest in. And Penelope found herself dividing her time between helping with indoor tasks and exploring the ranch on horseback, often with Owen as her guide. These rides became the highlight of her days. Owen proved to be knowledgeable not just about ranching, but about the natural world around them, pointing out medicinal plants, explaining the behavior of wildlife they encountered, sharing stories of the land's history that he had learned from local tribes. He was a different man away from the scrutiny of others, more relaxed and occasionally even humorous, his rare smiles becoming more frequent as they grew comfortable in each other's company. On the fourth day after the fire, they rode to a small hidden canyon where a crystal-clear spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a lush oasis of greenery in the otherwise arid landscape. Dismounting, they let the horses drink while they sat on sun-warmed stones beside the spring. "I've never shown this place to anyone else," Owen admitted, watching as Penelope trailed her fingers through the cool water. "Not even Caroline knows about it." Penelope looked up in surprise. "Why show me then?" He was silent for a moment, his eyes on the rippling water rather than her face. "Because you see things," he finally said. "Not just with your eyes, but—" He gestured vaguely toward his chest. "You understand the value of places like this, the sacredness of them." The compliment touched her deeply. "Thank you for sharing it with me, it's beautiful." Owen nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Caroline packed us some lunch. Nothing fancy, just bread, cheese, and some of those apple preserves your sister helped make yesterday." They ate in companionable silence, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the hidden canyon. It was only when they had finished and were packing up the remains of their meal that Owen spoke again. "Your father is thinking of staying," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "He mentioned it yesterday. Said he hasn't felt so alive in years as he is working with the cattle again." Penelope wasn't entirely surprised. She had seen the change in her father over the past few days, the renewed vigor in his step, the light in his eyes that had been dimmed since her mother's death. "And the store?" "Our home in town. He's considering selling the lot," Owen replied, watching her closely for her reaction. "Using the money to buy into a small herd of his own. I've offered him a section of my grazing land to run them on as a partner rather than an employee." The news was unexpected, and Penelope took a moment to absorb its implications. "That's very generous of you." "It's good business," Owen countered. "Your father has forgotten more about cattle than most ranchers around here will ever know. Having him as a partner would be valuable to me." He paused, then added more softly, "And I think the arrangement might benefit others as well." There was a question in his words, one that Penelope wasn't quite ready to answer directly. "Pearl seems happy here," she said instead. "I haven't seen her so interested in learning new skills since before Mother died." "And you?" Owen asked, his gray eyes intent on her face. "Could you be happy here, Penelope, away from town, from the life you've known?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. They had been dancing around something these past days, an attraction, certainly, but perhaps something deeper taking root beneath it. Neither had spoken of it directly until now. "I think," she said carefully, "that happiness depends less on where one lives than on who one lives with." A smile slowly spread across Owen's face, transforming his usually serious features. "That's a very diplomatic answer." "It's an honest one," she countered, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. Owen moved closer, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "I'm not a man given to flowery speeches, Penelope, but these past days with you have been the brightest of my life. When I rode into town that night and saw the fire, I had no idea that in saving you I might be saving myself as well." Penelope's heart raced at his words and the warmth of his hand holding hers. "Saving yourself from loneliness," he said simply, "from a life half lived. I built this ranch, made it successful, but until you came, I never really understood what was missing." He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away as if giving her a chance to pull back. When she didn't, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both gentle and sure. Penelope had been kissed before awkward, fumbling attempts by town boys that had left her unimpressed. This was different. Owen kissed her with a certainty that spoke of a man who knew his own mind, who had made a decision and would stand by it. When they finally broke apart, Penelope found herself breathless, her hand having somehow found its way to the solid warmth of Owen's chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I know it's soon," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Too soon, perhaps. But I've lived long enough to recognize what matters when I find it. And you, Penelope Lawson, matter to me more than anything has in a very long time." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable, and Penelope found herself believing him completely. This wasn't the impulsive declaration of a boy, but the considered statement of a man who had built his life on careful decisions and honest work. "It's soon," she agreed softly. "But sometimes, I think the heart knows what it wants from the first moment, even if the mind takes longer to catch up." Owen smiled, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Does that mean you might consider staying, not just while your father decides what to do about the store, but longer?" "I think," Penelope said, her own smile growing, "that I would like very much to see where this path leads." Owen Norwood. Their return ride to the ranch was filled with a new awareness between them, an unspoken understanding that something profound had shifted. They spoke of practical things, the upcoming roundup, plans for the winter, books they had both enjoyed, but beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of joy that made even the most mundane topics seem somehow significant. As they approached the ranch house, Penelope saw her father and Pearl on the veranda with Caroline, all three engaged in animated conversation. The scene struck her as right somehow, as if the fire that had destroyed their old life had cleared the way for something new and potentially wonderful to grow. "I should speak with your father," Owen said as they dismounted. "Ask his permission to court you properly." Penelope handed her reins to a waiting stable boy and smiled up at Owen. "He'll say yes," she said confidently. "He likes you, respects you, and more than anything, he wants Pearl and me to be happy." Owen's expression was solemn despite the light in his eyes. "And are you happy?" Penelope thought about the question for a moment, considering all that had happened since the night of the fire. They had lost their home, their business, nearly all their possessions. Yet standing here in the afternoon sunlight, looking up at this man who had saved more than just her life, she felt a sense of rightness, of possibility that she had never experienced before. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like sunrise after a long night, and Penelope knew with sudden certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. True to Penelope's prediction, Frederick Lawson received Owen's request to court his daughter with a mixture of approval and barely concealed satisfaction. The two men spoke privately in Owen's study, while Penelope waited with Pearl and Caroline in the parlor, trying not to appear as anxious as she felt. When they emerged, her father's face was solemn, but his eyes held a warmth that told her all she needed to know even before Owen crossed the room to take her hand. "Your father has given his blessing," Owen said quietly, for her ears alone. "With the condition that we allow a proper courtship period before making any formal announcements." Penelope squeezed his hand in response, happiness bubbling up inside her. "A very reasonable condition," she agreed, her smile reflecting his own. Over the weeks that followed, life at the Norwood Ranch settled into a new pattern. The fall roundup came and went, with Frederick proving his worth many times over, his experience and eye for cattle earning the respect of even the most skeptical ranch hands. Pearl flourished under Caroline's tutelage, discovering a talent for cooking and household management that surprised everyone, including herself. And Penelope and Owen, true to their promise to Frederick, conducted a proper courtship, riding together in the afternoons, sharing meals with the family, and occasionally making the journey into town for church services or community gatherings. If their hands sometimes found each other beneath the dinner table, if their afternoon rides sometimes included stops at secluded spots for kisses and whispered promises, These were details kept between themselves. As September gave way to October, and the first hints of winter began to appear in the early morning frost, Frederick finally made his decision about the store. The lot in Holbrook would be sold, and with the proceeds, he would purchase a small starter herd of his own to run on Norwood land, becoming not just an employee but a partner in the ranch operations. The announcement, made over dinner one evening, was met with enthusiasm from all present. Caroline immediately began planning the conversion of the guest rooms into permanent family quarters for the Lawsons, while Pearl peppered Frederick with questions about which breeds he would select and whether she might be allowed to help name the calves. Later that evening, Penelope and Owen walked in the ranch house garden, the air crisp with autumn chill but the sky brilliantly clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet darkness. "Your father's decision changes things," Owen said as they strolled between rows of late-blooming flowers, their breath forming small clouds in the cool air. "He and Pearl will be permanent residents now, not guests." "Yes," Penelope agreed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the chill. "It seems our family is putting down roots here." Owen stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "I had planned to wait until Christmas," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "to honor your father's wish for a proper courtship period, but now, with your family committing to the ranch." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Penelope's breath caught in her throat as Owen opened the box to reveal a ring, a delicate gold band set with a modest but perfect diamond that caught the moonlight and reflected it back in miniature stars. "It was my mother's," Owen explained. "Caroline kept it for me, hoping that someday I would find someone worthy of wearing it." He took Penelope's hand, his expression earnest in the silver light. "I know it's only been 2 months since the fire since we met, but in that time, you've become essential to me, Penelope. The thought of facing a day without seeing your smile, hearing your voice, I can't imagine it." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I've thought about this carefully. I'm not a man who acts on impulse or speaks without meaning what he says. I love you, Penelope Lawson. I think perhaps I began to fall in love with you the moment I saw you at that window, surrounded by fire but still standing strong, still protecting your sister. And every day since has only deepened that feeling." He took a breath, then continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to build a life with you, here on this land. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to see our children running across these fields someday, knowing the freedom and beauty of this place as we do." He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Penelope Lawson, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Penelope looked down at this man who had saved her from fire, who had opened his home and his heart to her and her family, who was now offering her a future brighter than any she could have imagined before that fateful night in Holbrook. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice ringing clear in the quiet garden. "Yes, Owen Norwood, I will marry you." With hands that trembled slightly, Owen slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a sealing of the vows they would make formally before family and friends, but which were already written indelibly on their hearts. When they finally broke apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his arms still holding her close. "I thought I had built something lasting when I created this ranch," he murmured. "But now I understand that land and cattle and buildings are nothing without love to give them meaning." Penelope reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "The fire took everything we thought we needed," she said softly, "and gave us everything we truly wanted instead." They stood together in the moonlit garden for a long time after that, talking of plans and dreams for their shared future, both knowing that while the path ahead might not always be easy, they would walk it together, their love forged in fire and tempered by the promise of all the days to come. The wedding of Owen Norwood and Penelope Lawson took place on a crisp December day, with the mountains in the distance wearing fresh caps of snow and the ranch decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the season. The ceremony was held in the town church, with practically all of Holbrook in attendance, partly out of genuine goodwill for the Lawson family after their loss. But also, Penelope suspected, out of curiosity about the reclusive rancher who had so unexpectedly taken a bride. Pearl served as maid of honor, resplendent in a new dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, while Frederick gave his daughter away with a mixture of pride and wistfulness that brought tears to Penelope's eyes. Caroline had overseen every detail of the preparations with her characteristic efficiency, ensuring that the day would be perfect for her beloved brother and his bride. Penelope wore a gown of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered from a dressmaker in Prescott, and delivered just 3 days before the wedding. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes fixed on Owen waiting for her at the altar, she thought her heart might burst with happiness. Owen, dressed in a new black suit that showed off his broad shoulders and tall frame to advantage, watched her approach with an expression of such naked adoration that whispers rippled through the congregation. Few had ever seen the serious rancher look so openly emotional, and the transformation was remarkable. The service itself was simple but deeply meaningful, the couple exchanging vows in clear voices that carried to the back of the small church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was restrained in deference to their audience, but his eyes promised more to come when they were alone. The celebration afterward, held at the ranch, was more lavish. Caroline had spared no expense, hiring extra help from town and ensuring that the food and drink were plentiful. Musicians played in one corner of the large parlor, their fiddles and guitars encouraging guests to dance, once the formal dinner was concluded. As evening deepened, Penelope found herself momentarily alone, Owen having been drawn into a conversation with some neighboring ranchers. She stood by the window, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky when Pearl joined her, cheeks flushed from dancing and eyes bright with excitement. "Are you happy, Penny?" her sister asked, using the childhood nickname that had largely been abandoned as they grew older. Penelope smiled, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Pearl's ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "And you? Are you content with our new life here?" Pearl's expression grew thoughtful. "I was so angry at first, you know. After the fire, I kept thinking about all the things we'd lost: Mother's locket, the book Father gave me for my birthday, all those silly ribbons and trinkets that seemed so important." She glanced around the room, taking in the warm glow of lamplight, the sounds of laughter and music, the sight of their father deep in conversation with men who shared his passion for ranching. "But now," she continued, "I see that we gained far more than we lost. Father is himself again, not just existing but truly living. You have found a love that most women only read about in novels, and she smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I have discovered that I quite enjoy ranch life. Caroline has been teaching me not just cooking and household matters, but the business side of running a large operation. She says I have a head for figures." "You always did," Penelope said warmly. "Even when we were girls, you could calculate the cost of goods in the store faster than Father." Pearl nodded, then leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "And there's Thomas, Caroline's nephew, who's arriving next month to learn the cattle business from Owen. She showed me his photograph. He's quite handsome and only 21. Penelope laughed softly at her sister's obvious interest. "Well, we shall have to see what comes of that," she said, giving Pearl's hand a squeeze. "But remember what Father always says, a lady never appears too eager," Pearl finished with a grin. "Don't worry, I intend to be the very model of propriety. But there's no harm in making sure my hair is neatly arranged when he arrives, is there?" Before Penelope could respond, Owen appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of a man who now had every right to such gestures. "I hope I'm not interrupting sister confidences," he said, nodding to Pearl with a smile. "Not at all," Pearl replied, her eyes twinkling. "I was just leaving to rescue Father from old Mr. Henderson, who appears to be explaining the same cattle breeding theory he's shared at every gathering for the past 20 years. As Pearl moved away through the crowd, Owen turned to Penelope, his expression softening as it always did when they were relatively alone. "Are you enjoying our wedding day, Mrs. Norwood?" The new name sent a thrill through Penelope. "Very much, Mr. Norwood," she replied, leaning slightly into his embrace. "Though I find myself looking forward to the moment when we can bid our guests good night." A flash of heat in Owen's eyes told her he shared the sentiment. "Another hour or two at most," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "The older guests will begin to leave soon, and the others will take the hint." True to his prediction, the party began to wind down as the evening progressed. By 10 o'clock, the last wagon was disappearing down the drive, carrying the final group of well-wishers back to town. Frederick and Pearl tactfully retired to their quarters in the east wing of the house, while Caroline announced she was exhausted and would be in her room with a book, should anyone need her a transparent excuse to give the newlyweds privacy that nevertheless was appreciated. Finally alone, Owen led Penelope up the stairs to the master bedroom, now their shared room. He had insisted she make whatever changes she wished to the decor in the weeks leading up to the wedding. But Penelope had made only minor adjustments, finding the space already comfortable and welcoming with its large four-poster bed, handsome oak furniture, and large windows that offered views of both the mountains and the ranch buildings. Tonight, though, the room had been transformed by Caroline's thoughtful touch. Fresh flowers filled a crystal vase on the dresser. The bed was turned down with linens that Penelope had never seen before, finer than the ranch's usual practical bedding, and a small fire crackled in the fireplace, warding off the December chill. Owen closed the door behind them, then turned to his bride with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. "No more interruptions," he said softly. "No more propriety to maintain for others' sake. Just us, Penelope, just us at last." He crossed to her in 2 long strides, gathering her into his arms for the kind of kiss they had been unable to share in church or during the celebration, deep, passionate, and full of promise. Penelope melted against him, her arms twining around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that properly since I saw you walking down the aisle this morning," he admitted. "You looked so beautiful it almost stopped my heart." Penelope smiled, her fingers toying with the hair at the nape of his neck. "And you looked so handsome that Mrs. Peterson actually fanned herself when you walked past her pew." Owen chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest where Penelope was pressed against him. "Scandalous," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I only had eyes for you, my love, only you." With gentle hands, he turned her around to begin the many tiny buttons that ran down the back of her wedding gown. His fingers worked methodically, occasionally brushing against her skin in a way that sent shivers down her spine. "I may not be as skilled at this as your sister or a lady's maid," he said, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room, "but I promise to improve with practice." Penelope's laugh was breathless. "I have complete faith in your abilities, husband." The words seemed to affect Owen deeply. His hands stilled for a moment on her back, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Say that again." "Husband," she repeated softly, understanding his need to hear it. After a lifetime of building his ranch and his reputation, of standing apart and alone despite his success, he was now joined to another in the most fundamental way. "My wife," he responded, the final buttons coming undone beneath his fingers. "My heart." The night that followed was everything Penelope had dreamed of during their courtship, tender at times, passionate at others, but always infused with a deep love that transcended the physical union. Owen proved to be as considerate and attentive a lover as he was a man, guiding Penelope through the initial awkwardness with patience and care until they found their rhythm together. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart, Penelope felt a profound sense of peace. The path that had led them here had not been easy, the terror of the fire, the loss of her family's home and business, but in this moment, she could not regret any of it. For without those trials, she might never have known this happiness, this sense of having found exactly where and with whom she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she answered honestly. "If not for the fire, we might never have met. Or if we had, it might have been just in passing at church or in town, with no reason for our paths to truly cross." Owen nodded, his chin brushing against her hair. "I've thought the same. When I was riding toward town that night, I was tired from a long day of business in Winslow, thinking of nothing but a hot meal and my own bed. Then I saw the flames and everything changed." He tightened his arm around her, as if needing to reassure himself that she was safe and real in his embrace. "I couldn't see who was trapped at first, just that someone needed help. But when I looked up and saw you at that window, something inside me shifted. I knew I had to get to you no matter what. My hero," Penelope murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Even then, with flames all around and barely able to breathe, I remember thinking how steady you seemed, how certain. It gave me hope when I had none." They talked long into the night, sharing thoughts and feelings that had gone unspoken during their courtship, making plans for the future they would build together. It was only when the fire had burned down to embers, and the first hints of dawn were lightening the sky that they finally drifted to sleep, still wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that what had begun in fire had been transformed into something enduring and beautiful. Spring came early to the Norwood Ranch in 1886, bringing with it new life in every form. The cattle gave birth to healthy calves. The mares in Owen's prized breeding program produced strong foals, and the garden that Penelope had expanded with Caroline's help burst into colorful bloom almost overnight. But the most significant new life was growing within Penelope herself. By April, there was no mistaking the gentle swell of her belly, and the news of the coming child was received with joy by the entire household. Frederick, already settled comfortably into his role as a small-scale cattle breeder in partnership with Owen, took to the prospect of grandfatherhood with unexpected enthusiasm, whittling tiny wooden animals in the evenings for the baby's nursery. Pearl, who had indeed caught the eye of Caroline's nephew Thomas during his extended stay at the ranch, divided her time between helping Penelope prepare for the baby and engaging in increasingly less subtle courtship rituals with the young man. Caroline proved to be a font of practical knowledge about childbirth and infant care, having helped many of the ranch hands' wives through their confinements over the years. Her calm, matter-of-fact approach did much to alleviate Penelope's occasional anxieties about first-time motherhood. And Owen. Owen transformed before Penelope's eyes from a serious, sometimes stern rancher into an expectant father whose gruff exterior melted completely whenever he laid a hand on his wife's growing belly to feel the baby move. He took to reading aloud in the evenings not just to Penelope but to their unborn child, convinced that the baby could hear and would know his voice from birth. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter," he told Penelope one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Just healthy and strong, that's all I ask." Penelope smiled, her hand resting on her belly where the baby was particularly active. "Caroline is convinced it's a boy. She says I'm carrying high and forward, which is supposedly a sign." Owen chuckled, covering her hand with his own. "My sister has many talents, but I'm not sure predicting a baby's gender is among them." She was equally certain that the Hendersons' last child would be a girl, and young William seems quite decidedly male. "Well, we shall know soon enough," Penelope said, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder. "Dr. Frederick says another 6 weeks at most." The baby, however, had plans of his own. Just 5 weeks later, on a warm June morning, Penelope woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking, followed shortly by the first contractions. Owen, who had barely left her side in the preceding weeks, was already up and dressing for an early meeting with a cattle buyer. "Owen," she called, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I think it's time." He turned, one boot in hand, his eyes widening as he took in her meaning. For a moment he seemed frozen in place, then sprang into action with characteristic decisiveness. "I'll send for Dr. Fredericks," he said, pulling on his boot and crossing to the bed to help her sit up. "And Caroline will know what to do until he arrives." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Penelope. True to Owen's prediction, Caroline took charge of the situation with calm efficiency, directing Pearl to heat water and prepare clean linens while she helped Penelope walk the length of the hallway repeatedly, explaining that movement could help speed the process. Owen, barred from the birthing room by tradition but unwilling to be far from his wife, paced the hallway outside, his footsteps a comforting rhythm that Penelope could hear between contractions. Occasionally, he would call through the door, asking for updates or simply offering words of encouragement that brought tears to Penelope's eyes even through her pain. Dr. Fredericks arrived midday, by which point Penelope's labor was well established. After examining her, he pronounced everything progressing normally, if perhaps a bit slowly for a first child. "These things take time, Mrs. Norwood," he said kindly, patting her hand. "Your body knows what to do, just trust it, and try to rest between pains." As afternoon gave way to evening, Penelope's labor intensified. Caroline wiped her brow with cool cloths while Pearl held her hand, wincing slightly at the strength of her sister's grip during contractions, but never complaining. "I want Owen," Penelope gasped during a brief respite between pains. "Please, I need him here." Dr. Fredericks frowned slightly. Husbands were traditionally kept away from the birthing room, but Caroline nodded without hesitation. "It's their child," she said firmly. "And my brother has never been one to stand on convention when it matters." When Owen entered the room moments later, his face pale with worry but his eyes full of love, Penelope felt a renewed surge of strength. He moved to her side immediately, taking her hand from Pearl and bringing it to his lips. "I'm here," he said simply. "I'm right here with you, Penelope." With Owen's steady support, the final stage of labor seemed to pass more quickly. As the midnight hour approached, Dr. Fredericks announced that it was time to push, and Penelope gathered all her remaining strength for the ultimate effort of bringing their child into the world. At 12 minutes past midnight, after a final, exhausting push, their son was born a robust baby with a healthy cry and a shock of dark hair like his father's. Dr. Fredericks placed him on Penelope's chest, while Caroline efficiently dealt with the afterbirth, and Owen looked down at his wife and newborn son with an expression of such wonder and love that it brought fresh tears to Penelope's eyes. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, one large finger gently stroking the baby's tiny cheek. "Absolutely perfect." "What will you call him?" Pearl asked from the foot of the bed, her own eyes wet with happy tears. Penelope looked up at Owen, who nodded, indicating she should be the one to announce the name they had chosen. "Frederick Owen Norwood," she said, smiling at her father who had quietly entered the room upon hearing his grandson's first cries. "After the two finest men I've ever known." The elder Frederick's eyes misted over, and he cleared his throat gruffly before speaking. "A fine name for a fine boy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother would have been so proud, Penelope, so very proud." In that moment, surrounded by her family both old and new, with her son in her arms and her husband's steady presence beside her, Penelope felt a circle closing the journey that had begun in fire and fear, now complete in this peaceful room, filled with love and new life. Little Frederick, quickly nicknamed Freddie to distinguish him from his grandfather, proved to be a good-natured baby with his father's serious eyes and his mother's sunny temperament. He became the center of the household, adored not only by his parents, but by his Aunt Pearl, his grandfather, and his Aunt Caroline, all of whom vied for the privilege of holding him whenever Penelope was willing to relinquish him. Owen took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to all his endeavors, insisting on taking his turn with night feedings despite the demands of running the ranch, and often carrying Freddie with him as he went about his duties, narrating everything they saw and did as if the infant could understand every word. "He's making up for lost time," Caroline explained to Penelope one afternoon as they watched Owen showing Freddie a new foal in the paddock, the baby securely cradled in one strong arm. Our father was never demonstrative, never involved in our daily lives beyond discipline and occasional instruction. Owen swore long ago that if he ever had children, he would be a different kind of father. The summer passed in a haze of happiness for the extended family. Pearl's friendship with Thomas blossomed into a courtship that was conducted with propriety but clear mutual affection, leading to a quiet engagement announcement by early fall. Frederick's small herd thrived under his expert management, almost doubling in size through careful breeding and acquisition. And the ranch as a whole continued to prosper under Owen's steady leadership, with Caroline's efficient administration of the business affairs. As winter approached once more, bringing with it the anniversary of the fire that had changed their lives, Penelope found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. One evening, while Owen was settling Freddie for the night in the nursery adjoining their bedroom, she stood at the window watching the first snow begin to fall, soft flakes drifting down in the gathering darkness. "Penny for your thoughts," Owen said quietly, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I was thinking about last winter," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "About the fire and how close Pearl and I came to." She couldn't finish the sentence, still finding it difficult to contemplate what might have happened if Owen hadn't arrived when he did. "But I did come," he reminded her gently, tightening his embrace. "And now look at all we have, a son, a family, a future together." Penelope turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. In the soft lamplight, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the single strand of gray in his dark hair that hadn't been there a year ago, small signs of the passage of time that only made him more handsome in her eyes. "I love you, Owen Norwood," she said simply, the words carrying all the depth of feeling that had grown between them in their months together. His smile was tender as he bent to kiss her. "And I love you, Penelope Norwood, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." As his lips met hers, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that the fire that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her everything she could ever have wished for: a love as enduring as the land around them, a family bound by more than blood, and a home where the warmth came not just from hearth and shelter, but from hearts joined in perfect understanding. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in a blanket of white that would melt with the coming spring, just as the ashes of the past had given way to new growth and life. And in the quiet of their room, with their son sleeping peacefully nearby, Penelope and Owen reaffirmed the bond that had been forged in fire and tempered by love, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, as they had from that very first night in Holbrook when a cowboy broke through flames to save two sisters, and in doing so, found his own heart's salvation. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer fair in Holbrook had always been the highlight of the season. But this year's celebration was special, marking 10 years since the town had been officially incorporated. Colorful bunting decorated the main street, and a large pavilion had been erected in the town square for dancing and socializing. Penelope Norwood sat at one of the tables surrounding the dance floor, watching with a smile as her husband twirled their 4-year-old daughter Elizabeth in a simplified version of a waltz. Little Lizzie, as she was affectionately known, had her mother's auburn hair and her father's serious gray eyes, though they were more often alight with mischief than solemnity. She stood on Owen's boots as he moved them around the floor, her face a picture of concentration and delight. "She's going to be a heartbreaker one day," said Pearl, sitting down beside her sister with a glass of lemonade in hand. At 23, Pearl had blossomed into a beautiful young woman, her marriage to Thomas 2 years earlier having given her a new confidence and poise. "Just like her aunt," Penelope teased, eyeing Pearl's still flat stomach beneath her fashionable dress. "How are you feeling? Has the morning sickness passed?" Pearl nodded, her free hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen where her first child was just beginning to show. "Much better this week. Thomas is still treating me like I might break at any moment, but Dr. Frederick says everything is progressing perfectly normally." "Men," Penelope said with a laugh. "Owen was the same with both of my pregnancies." You'd think a rancher who's witnessed hundreds of animal births would be more practical about human ones. It's different when it's someone you love, Frederick Lawson said, joining his daughters at the table. At 58, he was still robust and active, though his hair was now more silver than brown. Your mother used to say I was worse than a fussy old hen when she was carrying you girls. A familiar peal of boyish laughter drew their attention to the far side of the pavilion, where 6-year-old Freddie was engaged in what appeared to be an improvised race with several other boys his age, weaving between tables and apologizing hastily to adults whose conversations they interrupted. "That boy," Frederick said, shaking his head but smiling indulgently. "Energy like a cyclone." "He comes by it honestly," Penelope replied, watching as her son, the spitting image of Owen except for his mother's warm brown eyes, completed another circuit of the pavilion. "Owen was up at dawn with him today, letting him help with the new colts before we came to town. I was hoping it might tire him out a bit." "That was optimistic of you," Pearl said dryly. "Freddie could probably run from here to Prescott and back and still have energy for a swimming race in the creek." As the musicians took a break, Owen and Lizzie returned to the table, the little girl's cheeks flushed with excitement from her first public dance. "Did you see me, Mama?" she asked, climbing onto Penelope's lap despite being arguably too big for such accommodations. "Papa says I'm a natural dancer." "I saw you, sweetheart," Penelope assured her, smoothing back a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "You were very graceful." Owen sat down next to his wife, his arm naturally finding its way around her shoulders. Despite the years that had passed, Penelope still felt a flutter in her stomach at his touch, a warmth that spread through her whenever he was near. "Where's Caroline?" Owen asked, looking around for his sister. "I thought she was with you. Mayor Wilson asked her to help judge the pie contest," Frederick explained. "Apparently there's quite a rivalry between Mrs. Henderson and the new schoolteacher, and they needed an impartial opinion." Owen chuckled. "Caroline will tell them exactly which pie is better, diplomacy be damned. She's never been one to sugarcoat the truth, even when it comes to actual sugar." The conversation flowed easily among the family members, occasionally interrupted by townspeople stopping by to chat. The Norwoods were well respected in Holbrook, now Owen for his business acumen and fair dealing, Penelope for her work with the town's small library and education committee, and the entire family for their generous contributions to community projects. As the afternoon wore on, Freddie eventually tired enough to sit still for a while, and Lizzie fell asleep in her grandfather's arms, her small face peaceful in repose. Owen took Penelope's hand, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Norwood?" he asked, the formality of his words belied by the intimate smile that accompanied them. "I would be delighted, Mr. Norwood," she replied, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor where the musicians had resumed playing, this time a slower, more romantic melody. As they moved together with the ease of long practice, Penelope couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come since that terrifying night, when fire had threatened to end her life before it had really begun. Now she was surrounded by love, blessed with 2 beautiful children, part of a family that had grown and strengthened through both joy and occasional hardship. "Happy?" Owen asked softly, seeming to read her thoughts as he often did. "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "You?" His answer was to pull her a fraction closer, his hand warm and steady against the small of her back. "More than I ever thought possible," he said, his voice low and meant only for her ears. "Sometimes I still wake up in the night and just watch you sleeping beside me, hardly able to believe that you're real, that all of this is real." Penelope understood exactly what he meant. There were moments when their happiness seemed almost too perfect, too complete to be true. But then one of the children would scrape a knee, or the creek would flood in the spring, or a difficult calving would require all hands on deck for a sleepless night. And the very real challenges of their life would remind her that their happiness was not a dream, but something they worked for and maintained every day. "I love you," she said simply, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you," he replied, his eyes holding hers in a gaze that still had the power to make her heart race after all these years. Until the stars fall from the sky, Penelope. Until the mountains crumble and the rivers run dry. As they continued to dance, the sounds of the fair surrounded them, children laughing, neighbors talking, music playing the vibrant life of a community that had nearly been left behind but was now an integral part of their family's story. And at the center of it all was the love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. A burning building, a desperate rescue, and two hearts finding in each other exactly what they had always been searching for. Later that night, after the children had been tucked into bed and the house had settled into peaceful silence, Penelope and Owen sat on the veranda of their ranch house, watching as the moon rose over the distant mountains, casting silver light across the landscape they both loved so deeply. "Thank you," Penelope said softly, her head resting against Owen's shoulder. "For what?" he asked, his arm tightening slightly around her. "For being there that night, for saving us, for everything that came after." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "For giving me a life more wonderful than anything I could have imagined." Owen bent to kiss her, a gentle touch that still held all the passion of their early days together. When he drew back, his expression was serious but filled with love. "It was you who saved me, Penelope," he said quietly. "I had built this ranch, made it successful, but before you came, it was just a place. You made it a home." As they sat together in the moonlight, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor and love, Penelope knew that whatever the future might hold, they would face it as they had faced everything since that first fateful night together, with courage and devotion, their love a flame that neither time nor trials could ever extinguish. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and the warm summer breeze carried the scent of sage and pine across the land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to family. And in that perfect moment of contentment, Penelope silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought her and Owen together through fire and fear, leading them to a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them.